I guess the best way is to just be straight up and say that I believe that these men, because so far that we know of, it has just been men, but it seems as if those who have supported the president's positions on foreign policy matters have gotten, well, their faces marked. Now I know that the official stories have been, some would say, wildly concocted.
Now to John Kerry's testimony from 1971 before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee.
Will the committee come to order? The committee is continuing this morning its hearings on proposals relating to the ending of the war in Southeast Asia. This morning the committee will hear testimony from Mr. John Kerry, and if he has an associate, we'd be glad to hear from them. These are men who have fought in this unfortunate war in Vietnam, and I believe they deserve to be heard and listened to by the Congress and by the officials in the executive branch and by the public generally. You have a perspective that those in the government who make our nation's policy do not always have.
I would like to say for the record that, and also for the men behind me who are also wearing the uniform and their medals, that my sitting up here is really symbolic. I'm not here as John Kerry. I'm here as one member of a group of 1,000, which is a small representation of a very much larger group of veterans in this country. And were it possible for all of them to sit at this table, they would be here and have the same kind of testimony. I would simply like to speak in very general terms. I apologize if my statement is general, because I received notification yesterday you would hear me, and I'm afraid because of the injunction I was up most of the night and haven't had a great deal of chance to prepare. I would like to talk representing all those veterans and say that several months ago in Detroit, we had an investigation at which over 150 honorably discharged and many very highly decorated veterans testified to war crimes committed in Southeast Asia.
Not isolated incidents, but crimes committed on a day-to-day basis with the full awareness of officers at all levels of command. It's impossible to describe to you exactly what did happen in Detroit, the emotions in the room, the feelings of the men who were reliving their experiences in Vietnam. But they did. They relived the absolute horror of what this country, in a sense, made them do. They told the stories of times that they had personally raped, cut off ears, cut off heads, taped wires from portable telephones to human genitals and turned up the power, cut off limbs, blown up bodies, randomly shot at civilians, razed villages in a fashion reminiscent of Genghis Khan, shot cattle and dogs for fun, poisoned food stocks, and generally ravaged the countryside of South Vietnam.
And Secretary of State John Kerry has drawn some criticism for comments that he made about the attacks on Friday and also the Charlie Hebdo rampage that we watched unfold back in January. John Kerry is suggesting that the assault on the satirical newspaper was in a way more understandable than the horror that unfolded last week. Joining me now, presidential candidate, New Jersey Governor Chris Christie. Governor, welcome.
Hey, good to see you, Martha. He needs to get some sleep and shut up, is what he needs. That's disgraceful. For the Secretary of State of the United States to stand up and say that there's some rationale for what happened in January, these are the kind of weak, mixed signals that this administration sends that helps to really, make the American people think that there's no one watching the store.
Well, it's being reported by the Associated Press that 2 cars in Secretary of State John Kerry's motorcade in India were involved in a traffic accident. There weren't any injuries. However, the accident did result in some damage to both cars, one of which was switched out, and then the motorcade went on to the airport. John Kerry was in Ahmedabad, India, for a long scheduled appearance at an international investment conference. And also, they go on to note here, to prepare for President Barack Obama's trip to India later this month.
A quick spin through the Swiss Alps following negotiations on Iran's nuclear policy went awry for U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry. Police! The State Department says he apparently hit a curb while cycling in Switzerland and broke his right leg. Kerry was quickly flown to a hospital in Geneva for treatment. He'd been scheduled to head to Madrid, Spain later in the day, and then on to Paris to meet with Iraq's prime minister to talk about how to combat the militant group Islamic State. Instead, he'll now head back to the U.S. to rest and recover.